The spiralling cost of caring for society's most vulnerable. Council tax bills could soar to meet the shortfall in funding for the sick and elderly, but even that may not be enough to avert the growing crisis.
Also tonight, branded terrorists and banned the British neo-Nazis who celebrated the murder of Joe Cox.
The Syrian families fleeing Assad's advancing army as he scents victory in Aleppo.
And squid and chips, how the changing face of the fish supper is giving cod the cold shoulder.
This is the ITV Evening News with Mary Nightingale and Alistair Stewart.
Good evening. Council tax bills could shoot up across England next year to try to plug a massive shortfall in funding for elderly and social care. Ministers are considering allowing local authorities to raise bills as it's feared the system is at a tipping point, leaving many vulnerable people with nowhere to go.
Labour accused the government of passing the buck to town halls and council taxpayers for its own failures. Local government says their grants have suffered huge cuts over the past 6 years and fear even anticipated 5% rise in council tax won't be enough. Here's our political correspondent, Libby Vina.
A system in crisis that even ministers appear to agree needs more money. But who is going to pay for the millions of people who need care but have to rely on the state to provide it? There was no answer from the government in last month's autumn statement, so could council tax rises now be on the table? Labour was today piling on the pressure.
This crisis in social care has been made by this government due to £5 billion being cut from adult social care budgets. Can the Minister confirm that the government intends to dump this funding crisis onto local councils and council taxpayers through increasing the social care precept?
Providers in my constituency tell me that they are losing staff to ASDA because they can't compete with pay and conditions because the council can't commission care at a price that enables them to do so.
The Minister was giving little, if anything, away about his plans.
Mr. Speaker, any system would benefit from higher budget, and social care is no exception. But quality matters too.
But what sort of council tax rises could be in store for householders around the country? For an average Band D property, council tax was around £1,500 back in 2010. Last year, George Osborne allowed councils to increase taxes by 2% to fund social care. This put up council tax for the same property by around £22. If councils now increase tax by, say, 5%, it could cost more than £100 per home. But there's a problem. Poorer councils often find it harder to raise enough revenue while facing even greater demands for services.
The Prime Minister's claim to be building a country that works for everyone has a rather hollow ring in the care sector, with places in homes such as this one costing between £500 and £1,000 a week. Fewer and fewer councils are able to afford them.
So are council tax rises the answer?
I think it is a sticking plaster, and one of our concerns is that it's a very local sticking plaster, which means that it becomes a bit of a postcode lottery. This is a national problem.
It's a national problem that many say the government can simply no longer ignore.
In the last few minutes, the Chancellor, Philip Hammond, has denied that the Prime Minister barred him from announcing extra cash for social care in the autumn statement. But most in the industry believe that council tax rises alone won't be enough and central government does need to step in.
Libby Vina at Westminster, thank you.
A British neo-Nazi group which celebrated the murder of MP Joe Cox is to be the first right-wing organisation to be banned as terrorists. The Home Secretary, Amber Rudd, described national action as racist, homophobic and anti-Semitic.
The organisation is part of a new wave of right-wing extremists who some fear are becoming an increasing threat. Our security editor, Rohit Kachuri, reports.
The age-old language of the new breed of far-right extremists. This was a demonstration by National Action in Newcastle last year.
The battle has come to us!
It produces glossy propaganda Now it will be classified alongside those groups as a prescribed terrorist organisation.
National Action is a vile group. They promote homophobia, they promote violence and terrorism, and they have no place in this country. That's why I'm taking this action today.
Search online and the group's website appears alongside the phrase "Death to traitors, freedom for Britain." They're the words Thomas Mair used when he first appeared in court accused of killing the MP Joe Cox. But it says it's a radical group, not extremist, and it's clear it will challenge any libelous attempts to label us as such. They say we only advocate legal violence. And yet, Zach Davis, a member of the group, was jailed for attempting to decapitate a man because he was Asian.
Torture me.
He used a claw hammer and machete to attack the dentist at a supermarket in North Wales.
They inspire people. They may not actively go out and encourage people and order them to do it, but they inspire them. And we've seen this with other groups, such as Islamist groups.
According to one estimate seen by ITV News, the group has more than 60 members. And we understand that at least one has been referred to the government's de-radicalisation programme. The far right is on the rise across Europe. Today's reclassification seems to be an attempt by the government to respond to that as it reconsiders what constitutes terrorism. Rohit Kachru, ITV News.
Police have arrested a man in southeast London who reportedly shouted he wanted to kill Muslims before stabbing another man on a train. The attacker then allegedly chased other passengers outside Forest Hill Station. Our reporter Sejal Karia is there tonight. Sejal, what have police said about the attack?
Well, the police are investigating whether there was a terrorist-related motive to this attack in which a man was stabbed on a train as it approached Forest Hill Station here in South London. Eyewitnesses on that train said the man shouted, "Death to Muslims" and "I want to kill a Muslim" before, during and after that attack. One of those passengers, Richard Etienne, told me what happened when he came face to face with him.
He looks me dead in my eye, but then looks at the woman I was sat opposite, and she's wearing a hijab, and he turns and faces her as he stands in front of me, so now my vision of her is obscure, and says, and wields a knife right in front of her, and I can see, and he says, "I don't want me a Muslim woman, I want me a Muslim man," and at that point carries on down the train.
The victim, who is said to be in his 40s, is being treated in hospital, and his injuries are said to be serious but not life-threatening. And the police say that they have arrested a suspect who is being held at a police station on suspicion of grievous bodily harm.
Cedric Carrier in South London, thank you.
And 6 people have been arrested on suspicion of terror offences. Police searched properties in Derby, Burton-upon-Trent and London earlier today as part of what they described as a significant operation.
The Syrian army says it's in the final throes of taking full control of the city of Aleppo tonight. The Assad government has warned the remaining rebels there either to surrender or die.
But there are also many children and civilians inside there too. And one described the heavy bombardment from pro-government forces as resembling doomsday. Juliette Bremner with the latest.
There is no safe passage from the smouldering ruins of Aleppo. Members of a family run for their lives as the battle for the east of the city reaches its brutal end. Soldiers from the Syrian army have made dramatic advances in the last 24 hours, running door to door, flushing out their enemies. The regime boasts that the rebels are on the verge of defeat. The battle's at an end. Only 10% remains in rebel hands, this lieutenant briefs journalists. Amidst this devastation, there is life. Salah's a former student who joined the rebellion 5 years ago.
Hello, everybody. Here is Aleppo. Today is Monday, December 12th. We are still here under siege.
Regime troops have pushed those left behind into one small pocket of the city. Doctors are amongst the trapped. In London, their friend and colleague David Knott fears they're about to be massacred.
I've just received a message from the doctors who I'm in contact with on an hourly basis now to tell me that there are now thousands of people in the street in this one neighbourhood, and what they're expecting is a possible bomb to drop on top of them and kill them all.
He's tried and failed to extract his friends from this hell. After 5 years, President Assad's forces have victory in their sights. The only question is whether they'll spare the thousands caught in this last stand. Juliet Bremner, ITV News.
And our correspondent Dan Rivers is in Syria tonight and joins us live. Dan, if Aleppo does fall to the government, how significant will that be?
Well, Alistair, I think this will be a major military and psychological victory. Tonight, the Syrian army are actually saying they control 98% of the city, and that final 2%, it seems, will fall very, very soon. It's a shrinking island of rebel territory that is being pummeled, as you saw in that report. This city is so significant because it is the biggest city in Syria by population. It is the commercial hub. It is the cultural heart of Syria. It will be a massive psychological boost, morale boost for President Assad's forces and for his allies. And it will mean the rebels no longer control any major urban centre in Syria. So questions about where it leaves them. But real questions as well about those people who are left inside, those who have escaped. There are reports of many being detained, men being conscripted into the army, and what will happen to those tens of thousands, we believe, who are still under fire in East Aleppo.
Dan, thank you.
Still to come on the ITV Evening News. Squids in, why warmer waters mean calamari could replace cod at the Chippy. And
the main purpose of the scheme is to help boys to find activities which will give them pleasure and satisfaction.
In a rare interview, the Duke of Edinburgh on the 60th anniversary of his award scheme. Those stories and more after the break. Welcome back. The Disasters Emergency Committee is launching an urgent appeal to save millions of children and adults caught in the middle of Yemen's civil war from starving to death. Country is split between the Saudi-led coalition and the Houthi rebels who've seized the capital Sana'a. The UN estimates that since March last year, more than 10,000 civilians have been killed. There is a massive humanitarian crisis with 7 million people short of food. And almost 500,000 children under 5 are severely malnourished. A warning, there are upsetting images of starving children in this report from Neil Connery.
Salah Hadin is 14 months old and fighting for his life. The effects of severe malnutrition have weakened his body to a point beyond exhaustion. He can't turn his head as his tiny skeleton lies fragile. Another victim of Yemen's suffering. A few days after these pictures were filmed, Salah Hadin passed away. This is what 20 months of war have done to Yemen, already one of the poorest countries in the world. Nearly 500,000 children are suffering from severe malnutrition in a country where 80% of the population depend upon humanitarian aid. In October, ITV News saw firsthand Yemen's humanitarian crisis. In the village of Tahita, they brought their starving children out to us, pleading for the world to help. Ali showed me his sister, Saida, who's 18 months old. She has diarrhea and she's vomiting, he told me. All she does is cry. She's just limp like this all the time. Alice Klein from Save the Children has just returned from Yemen and told me of the scenes she witnessed in hospitals and clinics.
You walk in and it's wall-to-wall parents with their tiny babies and children who are severely malnourished. They have their ribs jutting out, they're just skin and bone. A lot of them are struggling to breathe. They're essentially fighting to stay alive.
Now, the Disasters Emergency Committee, which brings together 13 of the UK's leading aid charities, is launching an appeal. Martin Clunes is one of those fronting the fundraising efforts.
It's a really good time to raise money for Yemen because it's really struggling in the news. People's awareness of it is tiny with all the other ghastly stories going on, but the crisis is very, very real. 2/3 of the population need some sort of assistance and 500,000 children are starving.
Yemen's need couldn't be greater. The charities behind this new appeal are hoping the public responds generously to help those whose lives are at risk.
Desperate scenes and powerful pleas. Is this now critical?
Alistair, when we were there in March, things were bad enough. When we returned in October, the desperate scale of this crisis was clear at every turn. When you see an earthquake or a tsunami, it's very clear to see its effects very quickly and simply. What we're talking about here is a war that has gone on for 20 months, a grinding war that is leaving the people of Yemen now facing a race against time to survive. The Disasters Emergency Committee, who are behind this appeal, have a very strict criteria in calling it. That gives you a measure of how urgent the need is. Salah Hadin, who we saw at the start of my report there, will not be the last child to die from hunger in Yemen. But this appeal could save so many others.
Neil, thank you.
Here, a man who strangled a Metropolitan Police officer before trying to dissolve his body in a bath of acid has been jailed for life. Stefano Brizzi from South London admitted dismembering PC Gordon Semple while high on drugs.
Crew Alexandra Director of Football Dario Gradi says he will do everything within his power to assist the authorities following his FA suspension. The 75-year-old is accused of smoothing over a sexual assault complaint in the 1970s. He denies any wrongdoing.
And all Southern Rail services will be halted this week by 3 days of staff walkouts. Company bosses today lost an appeal in court in a final attempt to stop the strikes going ahead. Now the tide could be turning against our love of traditional fish and chips. Experts say rising North Sea temperatures are pushing cod and haddock out of British waters. They're being replaced by other species, including squid. But will people really want to eat them with chips? Well, Rupert Evelyn went to Brixham in Devon to find out.
There's no shortage of squid. Often associated with Mediterranean menus, there are plenty in UK waters, with stocks staying strong. Trawlers aren't tied to quotas for squid or their relation cuttlefish, as they are for much of their haul. But yet we don't eat it anywhere near as much as we could. And with fears that our favourite cod may be pushed out of UK waters by rising sea temperatures, is change now on the horizon.
I would say that water temperature does play a major part. So to say that squid could overtake the nation's favourite of cod and chips, possibly not. But I do think there is a future for cuttle and chips and squid and chips.
But can a nation let go of cod and dare to diversify?
On a squid, there's not a lot of waste at all. I mean, this is a dayboat squid. It's probably still swimming yesterday. It's fantastic.
In the chippy, they have noticed a change in our eating habits, driven arguably by their own skill at sales.
You know, we sell a lot more squid than we ever have, and we tend to, like, on a Friday night there'll be a queue for takeaway fish and chips because that's the main day. But we'll do a bit of squid and it'll be on the bar here, so people will try it, and you know, and it really does work.
Well, much of what is being landed here today won't ever find its way onto a British plate. In fact, the majority of this will be sold at auction in the morning and sent overseas. As politicians today debate fishing quotas, they do so knowing that nothing in the sea stays the same forever. We currently ship crates of squid and cuttlefish to Spain and South Korea. Given environmental predictions, perhaps in time we'll keep more for ourselves. Rupert Evelyn, ITV News, Brixham.
And we have some breaking news for you now. And post office workers are to stage 5 days of strikes next week, the week before Christmas, in a dispute over jobs, pensions and branch closures. The Communication Workers Union has just announced. We'll be putting more on our website when we get it. That's itv.com/news.
And finally tonight, Prince Philip has told ITV about his immense pride in his awards scheme, which celebrated its 60th anniversary this year. In a rare interview, the 95-year-old says the Duke of Edinburgh Awards have helped give generations of young people a taste of what life's really like.
And it's still as popular as ever. Among the past recipients are a woman who would later marry one of his grandsons, as Nina Nana explains.
Did you do your expeditions in England or?
No, we did ours in Scotland, sir.
Scotland, did you?
They got their Duke of Edinburgh awards by canoeing on a Scottish lake. Why, Prince Philip jokes, didn't they make it easier on themselves?
Yeah, but you know, it wasn't a good choice, was it? Because if you're going to do it by boat, you want to do it in a river, then you float down, you don't have to go in.
The Duke of Edinburgh has been dispensing advice on the awards that carry his name for 6 decades. Speaking to ITV, he says the scheme remains a source of huge pride.
I think just this sort of experience, I think, is going to help. When you come to think of it, children come into the world completely ignorant and with no experience. At least this gives them some idea of what life is like.
Yes. The main purpose of the scheme is to help boys to find activities which will give them pleasure and satisfaction, perhaps for the rest of their lives.
Prince Philip founded his awards scheme in 1956 after concerns about the development of young boys in Britain after the war. To win medals, boys aged between 14 and 18 undertook community service, fitness and outdoor pursuits.
The expedition was never intended as an endurance test, but it becomes pretty near to one during the descent.
Amongst the first recipients, Tony Mullins got his Gold Duke of Edinburgh Award in 1958.
It offers a challenge and it's an adventure and it's fun. And this is what young people really get out of it. It's great fun. I love it every minute of it.
Amongst the millions who've since taken part, and by the late 50s girls were included too, was a teenage Kate Middleton who got her Gold Award from the Duke of Edinburgh many years before she'd go on to marry his grandson. Nina Nanar, ITV News.
And you can see when Philip met Prince Philip, 60 years of the Duke of Edinburgh Awards from 9 o'clock here on ITV.
That's it for now. Tom Bradbury will be here with the news at 10.
But from all the team here, have a very good evening. Thank you for watching.
Bye-bye.